Coming up, the New York Football Giants are 5-1, and it begs the question, does Joe Schoen need to start looking in between those couch cushions to find a little bit of spare change to go out and make potentially key acquisitions to improve the New York Football Giants playoff push? Yes, friends, it is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your host over here, Adam Armick, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast with my boy, Doug Norrie. And over there, you're going to find the seasoned generational ticket holder, the healthy, wealthy, and wise, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir, on a Tuesday?
It was great to see all of the media that was basically saying the Giants are doing things wrong. They should be tanking. Why are they winning all these games?
Idiots.
To now all of a sudden turn to the other side and be like, this Giants team could be a contender if they make key acquisitions. You're like, what? Can you please just be consistent? If you don't like the Giants, just stay on your side of the street. Over here, we're looking at a potential playoff berth, and we're trying to grow as a team. It just makes me feel so good. That's why I tune into these talk show stuff in the morning, is just to see these people have to eat crow consistently.
Good morning to Marty over on YouTube and everybody joining the live stream. Bring that morning cup of coffee right up. And enjoy, friends, because you're right. Listen, and I know we talk about on this show, I am seen as, and I probably am, the more critical of the two of us when it comes to the team. But never at any point was there ever a moment where I wasn't saying, and the reason why I want to see them improve is because I think they can be successful, because I think they can win football games, right? There wasn't a world here. The second that they won the first game and then the second game, and once they won the first two games, you go, well, that's it. We're now a team that can scrap and fight. And hey, every single week you want them to win games. 3-1, 4-1, 5-1. And by the way, some of those people, we don't call anybody out by name, but you know who you are. When they're 4-1 and you say, this is such a disaster for the Giants. You could say it like when they're 2-0, if you want to say you get lucky against the Titans and then you beat the Panthers. This is a disaster because you're not going to win football games. At a certain point, you cross the threshold. You've won too many games to look back now. You're a 5-win football team through 6 weeks of the season. As I think maybe you said last episode, a lot of people are saying now, you play 5-6 football, you're a 10-win team. That's good enough to get you in the playoffs. So it's really hard to sit there going into a Ravens game, knowing it was going to be a difficult task, to say, oh, they should go ahead and tank that one, go 4-2, and then look at the next 4 games like we did last episode and say, even though 3 out of 4 are winnable, you're going to want to try to lose those games too. It will go against every narrative that the new regime, Brian Daboll, and this team have been building.
But it also explained to me what they're supposed to be doing different. They're like, oh, you're ruining your chances. You should be tanking to lose games. It's like they're building a culture. They've got the team buying in. If you heard MetLife Stadium when Julian Love intercepted that ball against Lamar Jackson, the place was absolutely rocking. So you have all the fans are behind what you're doing. All the players are bought in. And you're saying what? You're supposed to not win football games. It just doesn't even make sense to me when the Giants are 5-1 and they're going to have one of the playoff spots in the NFC if they continue this.
Maybe we win, maybe we don't. And by the way, it's even just the good vibes, right? Whatever the result of the season is, and that's one part of it that I'm not going to say I understand, because you still got to eat the crow, but I get it. If you're from afar just saying oh, the Giants came into the season, they weren't expecting to win a lot of games. You're turning things over with a new GM, with a new head coach, right? All that stuff. You could look from afar and say, this team should be losing games because they're going to need draft picks, etc. But for the fan base, for people that are every day with the team, you're looking going we forgot that you can win football games in the NFL. We're finally doing it, and you're like, no, man, you're better off losing. You'd be like, nice try, guy. We haven't had a winning season in years. There's no way we're going to hand one back, regardless of what the results are.
I'll give you one last thing, Adam, and then we can really kick the show off. But They asked Darius Slayton, how do you not get ahead of yourself with this 5-1 record? And his response to it was, over the years here, we've had to fully ignore what our record is for all the bad reasons that you think about. So it's very easy when we're good to not think about the record too. So he's gone the other way where they're like, 1-6, and he's like, I got to throw the record out. So they do the same thing on the other side, and maybe that actually gives them some momentum moving forward.
Yeah, and Daniel Jones also had a quote. I'll paraphrase it, not having it directly in front of me. We're like, "Are you surprised?" And he goes, "No, we're not." And he chuckled, and I don't, you can take it as like, "We're not surprised." I mean, come on, guys, we drew it up, buddy. Come on. But he was just like, "No, we're not surprised. Like, we're putting in the work. Like Brian Dable, the coaching staff, we've worked really hard in the offseason. And every single year, by the way, for the Giants or any team in the NFL, like that's the intention. No team." The Jacksonville Jaguars, who the Giants are going to play, they have Doug Peterson now. I'm sure that they looked at it as an opportunity, and their season is still very much in front of them, right? They've shown some sparks. The Atlanta Falcons, right? Like, there are teams that come into a season thinking, listen, we feel like if we play well, we can surprise some teams and win some ball games. And then week to week, you just let it fall where it may. For the New York Football Giants, it's been falling on the right side of wins and losses more often than not. That being the case, the question really of this episode is like, does Joe Schoen need to go out and try to, given the limited funds, find a way to improve this team for the almost second half of the season? Still a couple games away before we hit that bye week and the effective midpoint for the Giants. And a really good way I thought to look at this was going back to this Baltimore Ravens game and just noting, we understand some of the grades that came out of this and what it can be indicative of. So we always give the disclaimer. Everybody knows it. PFF is not the end all be all. And we do have a humorous way to prove that point coming up in a minute. But the first thing in terms of where does Joe Schoen need to look to improve this roster, maybe it need not be the offensive line anymore. We wondered about it over the start of the season. Bredesen, Feliciano. We obviously know Glowinski was having some of his struggles. And then Evan Neal coming along, right? You go over there and you take a look at the grades coming out of this game. Ben Bredesen played to an 87.4 pass protection grade, a 78.8 overall. You've got guys like Glowinski, who had been inconsistent on each phase, 72.5 offensively, a 70 and a 69 between pass and run block. I also add in the rookie Evan Neal, who's starting to take those steps forward, a 68.8 and a 69 split there, good for a 70.5. The only one really who struggled a little bit was Andrew Thomas. That's because he had that ankle situation going on. So he had some issues there in the run blocking game. But by and large, really good sample size here to say that this offensive line is getting better. And this goes along with the eye test, right? The team looks more consistent than they have in previous weeks.
You mentioned one name, Mark Glowinski. We were very critical of him the first couple of weeks. He was not playing very good football. He just wasn't, Adam. And he came back and he's proven to be a stable part of this offensive line. And, you got to give credit where credit's due. Getting over a 70 Pro Football Focus. Obviously, we haven't been calling his name as much when people are getting into the backfield, and that really is kind of like the litmus eye test there. Ben Bredesen, I mean, this is so unexpected to see this kind of rise to be a stable offensive lineman. We talked about, is Joshua Ezeudu ready? In the preseason, we even mentioned that we thought Ezeudu would take over Shane Lemieux, not even Ben Bredesen, by week 6 or week 7. Here we sit, and Bredesen's starting to kind of stabilize that side of the offensive line, knowing that Andrew Thomas obviously had his ankle injury and was dinged up a little bit in this one. We needed guys like Ben Bredesen, Mark Glowinski more than ever in this game.
Yeah, and remember, a little bit of a shuffle of the line there where Bredesen had to go over and play a little bit of center in this one. John Feliciano was the lowest rated offensive lineman here. He came and went with, I think, the groin injury. He's hoping it's not going to affect him. We'll see. So it does make it actually really valid there when you talk about Bredesen. If this is, is he going to be an 87? We'll go ahead and let that play itself out. But as Shane Lemieux starts to come back healthy, now you just feel like not only do we have a little bit of quote unquote depth, but depth that we actually think we can rely on. Ezeudu did struggle in this one. Obviously, when he got some of his reps there, specifically in pass blocking, which I think is the big indication. We knew that was going to be the area he's going to have to work on. The sample size keeps telling you he can do it in the run game. He can be a big boy and move some bodies around, but he's going to need time. But overall, with the offensive line playing like that, you have to really just take a step back and say, like, okay, if I only have limited possibilities here to really go out and try to add a key piece offensively, we're probably okay to say, like, the line is doing its job. It's developing. The cohesion is developing there. Remember, these are guys that hadn't played with one another across the board effectively. So that's another big impact to go along. We thought Shane Lemieux, well, he has experience with Andrew Thomas. Nope, take that out. So new players getting familiar. They're growing. They're getting stronger here. Then we take a look, obviously, over at just a couple other key stats here off the offense, Andy. But where did you want to go beyond the ratings?
Yeah, so I think one spot I want to go to is talk about Daniel Jones just a little bit and what's been going on over the last couple of weeks and why he's getting as much shine as he is from everyone.
Okay.
So we talked about getting away from Pro Football Focus. I think we've beaten that horse ad nauseum here. What I think is interesting is Dan Benton of Yahoo put out a really good article where he pulled some different statistics from people. Austin Gale, put this in there. Over the last 3 weeks, EPA, which is expected points added per dropback over the last 3 weeks. In third is Patrick Mahomes at 0.26 points per dropback. 2, Josh Allen, 0.31 per every dropback. Number 1 is Daniel Jones at 0.32 on every single dropback. So expected points added when Daniel Jones drops back to pass. Over the last 3 weeks, he has been the best quarterback in the NFL in that metric. And clearly we're not getting over our skis and saying that he's better than any of these players, but he is playing at a much better level than everyone expected. He's 67.5% completion percentage. So he's brought his completion percentage up. That's good for third in the league, over 100 pass attempts. So any starter for multiple games. Daniel Jones is throwing the ball effectively. And this narrative that he's not helping the team win the game or he's just kind of along for the ride with the rest of the team is not true the last few weeks.
So here's some interesting things just to throw that in there. And then I want to ask a question or maybe just give kind of a perspective around the NFL at large. Another one just to supplement that with something that we've gone back to here a couple of times. Next Gen Stats over on NFL.com. 67.3 completion percentage for Daniel Jones. That is almost 2.5 getting towards 3 completion percentage points higher than the expected completion percentage. So like those things matter. You talk about over the points over expectations on dropbacks, same thing. When you go over some of like the best players around the league right now, here's what's interesting to me and why I bring up this stat is that I wanted to ask this question, little inside, outside, little Giants, little NFL overall. Do you then think that we need to tap back in and adjust the way that we talk about QBs in the NFL? Because a guy like Geno Smith is playing really good football right now. And you can go over by that same metric completion percentage and you can say Geno Smith is completing 7.7 percentage points over expectation on his pass completions. Guys like, by the way, a Bailey Zappi, third-string rookie quarterback, doing the same thing. But then bigger names like Matthew Stafford and Tua Tagovailoa, those are guys that have been into the plus category in there. And I bring it up to say, we talked about, what is Daniel Jones going to cost in the offseason? I'm not getting to that conversation. But Kirk Cousins is leading a winning football team right now. Geno Smith is leading a highly competitive over expectation football team right now. At some point, Ryan Tannehill, the guy, right, like we said, oh, would you want Ryan Tannehill as your quarterback? Well, guess what? It's a team that's winning football games. And I wonder if we are going to praise Daniel Jones for what he's doing this season, as I think we should be, he's closer to that category of quarterback than he is the Patrick Mahomes and the Josh Allens. And I think it's just reasonable to say, hey, you know what? Winning football matters, as we've all always known. But maybe there is a little bit of a difference here when it comes to the way we should be looking at quarterbacks that play a similar style to what Jones has done.
Just keep in mind, though, Adam, Ryan Tannehill is 23rd in QBR, right? So he's further down the list.
And I'm talking about these guys you don't associate.
Yeah, you're just saying
ones,
that grouping of players. Even you could throw Derek Carr in that mix. That next grouping of players. But interestingly enough, Kirk Cousins is 17th on that list. Daniel Jones sits at 14th in total QBR, so he's been playing at least to that level.
Kirk Cousins is a great comp, right? Because why? The Vikings are winning their football games right now.
Yep.
They're both in like the middle of the pack there when it comes to QBR. And to look at them, you wouldn't say, give me, starting a franchise, we're taking either one of these guys right out the gates.
I think what your question actually brings me to another side question that comes up.
I love when questions only bring more questions.
Yeah, because Adam, I think we're an instant reaction, instant coffee, quick microwave, give me the response on players and their career, right?
But I want the pour over.
Oh yeah, you do want it. You want an artisanal one that takes a little bit of time
I
to
want to
mature.
simmer. I want to
But
simmer in it.
you mentioned some of those names. You look at Geno Smith as one of them. Geno Smith only had, a season basically to start for the Jets, and then obviously he got in a locker room altercation. All of a sudden he gets shipped out. He sits behind
Yeah.
Russell Wilson forever, and his career was written off after basically one season of play.
Yeah.
Now you're seeing him, his completion percentage over expected. I'm seeing the balls that he's throwing. He's throwing them off of 1 foot sideways and throwing it into a bucket. Like, he's making unbelievable throws, but we all wrote him off saying he's got no chance to be successful. His career's over. We already know what we got from Geno Smith. Well, under the right circumstances, under the right situation, he can be an effective quarterback. It could be the same thing to be said for Daniel Jones. We don't know how long this is going to last because the sample size of them not playing well is larger than the one of them actually performing well.
Right.
However, this is an indicator of what's possible if you get into the right situation, right scheme, right players, coaching staff, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it's like, yeah, we don't need to write off these guys. Maybe we're giving too much credit to certain players. I mean, look at Russell Wilson. The fall from grace for Russell Wilson is one of the more shocking things that I've seen. And right now, if you were to say, would you rather have Russell Wilson the way that he's playing over Daniel Jones? It would have been crazy to say that before week 1. Right now, you're like, Daniel Jones is way more effective with the ball in his hands than Russell Wilson is.
Andrew, he's ruined my fantasy football league. You know what I'm saying, man? And guess what? Courtney was watching something here at the apartment last night. I said, you know what I'll do? I'll walk over. I can walk over to town now. Go to my favorite little spot, downtown Point, sit down at the bar, watch a little, I thought football, but it turned out it wasn't football. It wasn't football at all, Andrew. It was very upsetting to me, very disturbing. That being the case, though, we can just round out this QB conversation because you mentioned that QBR. And this is what, and again, over the life cycle of a league, year after year, the cream is going to rise to the top. But Tua has an 80 QBR in those 4 games played. An 80 QBR. Let me reiterate that for you. But you go down the list. It's Josh Allen. It's Mahomes. It's Geno Smith 4th. It's a familiar face like Lamar Jackson 5th. It's Cooper Rush at the 6th spot. And he's now played enough games where that sample size is legitimate. Jalen Hurts. Then Herbert. Mariota, another great example of a veteran quarterback. He sits as the 9th highest rated QBR. Now, you can go look at his completion percentage and you can think about what is he responsible for. He's not far off. 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, a little over 1,000 yards on the season. Like, he is very similar to what Daniel Jones is doing. I'll take and love the completion percentage that Jones is bringing there. Brissett, 10th. Goff, Carr, Lawrence, then Daniel Jones, and then you get into this swath of older veterans like Tom Brady or a Joe Burrow who's trying to figure himself out. So all these things matter just when you talk about it, and the season is long. The last thing I'll say on Daniel Jones, and I want to actually hit one of these PFF stats coming out of that, and then we'll turn our attention over to the defensive side, is just as a friendly reminder, though, too, while Daniel Jones is 14th in the league in QBR, his QBR rating in ascending order from the beginning of the season: 21.8, 37, 45.7, 91.2, as we all know, and then 75.9 and 68. In these last 2 games where he has done it more with his arm than with his legs is where it really matters. That being the case, the other little note just out of that PFF side of things is that Daniel Jones also in this game, just to drive that point home, was a 58.6 in run. Didn't run the ball a lot. The Baltimore Ravens mitigated that and still put together a 68 passer rating. That's what matters here, is that Daniel Jones proves that when one element, what we think could be his best element, is taken away, can he still find a way to be successful?
Yeah, and before we switch over to the defensive side of the ball, because I do think that's where we want to spend a whole bulk of the time there, because there's some things that need improvement. I see a lot online of people saying the Giants need to go out and on the line. Is this the files are in the computer, Adam? I'm not sure where it is.
Take a picture. You put it on the line.
People keep talking about the Giants going out and getting a wide receiver. Obviously, we've heard DJ Moore is a name that's been mentioned. Everyone would love him. DJ Moore isn't going to happen. His cap hit for next season is like $25 million. And it's like, yeah, I know that we could fit that under our cap, but then are we a DJ Moore away from winning a championship? I don't think that's where we want to allocate all of our funds. Other people have said Brandon Cooks, another guy that, why don't we bring him into the building? A veteran that could really help us. He's got a $26.5 million cap hit next year. You know, his cap hit's $9 million this year. We don't even have enough to probably get him through the rest of this season. Adam, I personally don't think we should go out and get a wide receiver because that's not how this team is built anymore. I thought before it was like, oh, this is maybe what's holding back the offense. It's like, no, Daniel Jones is effective in spots. Wan'Dale Robinson coming back showed that he helped bring a nice little burst of energy. Daniel Bellinger has been playing tremendous. And you hope that you get back either Kadarius Toney or Kenny Golladay in some capacity to catch 2 or 3 balls a game. And it's by committee that we get this done. There's probably other places that we need to allocate funds more than the wide receiver room.
Yes. So here's my two-part response to that. One, you mentioned about DJ Moore, et cetera. Like I get the theory, but that's not where this is going to go here. You're not going to go spend big money to bring in a player. Now, if you thought DJ Moore is a part of the long-term future, yeah, maybe you want to try to make it happen. It just financially isn't very feasible. There were a number of guys that I did a lot of research on. Then I closed all those tabs out on my computer. But I did remember. So the way that I'm looking at it, in the same way that we're talking about teams that are potentially going to be sellers at the deadline. And already you saw Robbie Anderson is going out to Arizona. So they're already starting that process in Carolina. The Houston Texans are one of those teams. It's fascinating that when you look over at the NFL standings right now, the hardest part is to really label like teams that are definitely going to be sellers, right? New England's turned it around. They're not going to be a part of that. Even Pittsburgh, though they're 2-4, they're only one game back in the division because the Giants just beat the Ravens. So there's not a lot of teams that are really in that boat. Potentially, maybe the Jaguars start to fall into that category if the Giants beat them this weekend. But one of the other teams that I did take a look at was, of course, the Detroit Lions, and then also the Arizona Cardinals, where Robbie Anderson is going. If you were going to add somebody, my suggestion might be to go over and look at. I'll hit you with first the veteran player that's not going to excite anybody, but wouldn't cost you a lot, and in theory could be a little bit of just something, a little bit of tread on the tire. Voidable years for the last 2 years of his contract, so you'd be renting him for the remainder of the season. From Arizona, veteran AJ Green. Cost almost nothing on the books. He was on the books for 2.21 on the cap hit. The guarantee money is 1.1. So this number is probably going to be somewhere around $1 million. Who knows? AJ Green may get outright release potentially, but he had been there in the absence of DeAndre Hopkins. Now they have Hollywood Brown, but Hollywood Brown had a little bit of injury this past week. I'm not saying that AJ Green is AJ Green like you remember him. What I will say, though, a veteran wide receiver who can still stretch the field a bit for you, occupy some coverage, and doesn't cost a lot, right? Maybe worth a flyer if you're saying, hey, you want a 7th round pick for this thing, right? Maybe you go down that road. The other guy, go ahead and hit me with just your AJ reaction, and I'll talk about the other player.
It's interesting. It's bringing in a veteran leader. I understand that. Hollywood Brown is going to be out for like 6 to 7 weeks is what it sounds like, with a bad foot injury. They do have DeAndre Hopkins coming back. They did trade for Robbie Anderson. They do have Rondell Moore. So that is a very loaded building. That's why Andy Isabella got released from there. Yep. I can understand the appeal of bringing in a veteran. I don't necessarily know how much juice he has left, but hit me with your next one.
The next one was going to be looking over the Detroit Lions, who are going to be potentially in the tank here, and one, Josh Reynolds. Because Josh Reynolds is, again, a player who is under contract through 2023, and the numbers are total cap hit, $2 million this year with 1.2 guaranteed, so that would bring it down. 0 guaranteed salary for 2023 on a $4 million cap hit. So you could bring him in, certainly bring a little bit of value to the team, and then not have to worry about if it's going to cost you anything on the back end. And if you're just wondering about Josh Reynolds as a receiver, is that a flashy, sexy name? Of course it's not, because if it was, the Giants wouldn't be able to try to trade for him potentially. But when you go and look at his numbers over the years, he's just a nice little consistent receiver. And by the way, so far this season, 23 receptions on 34 targets, 335 yards, which would be more than anybody, a single receiver on the New York Football Giants right now, has 2 touchdowns on the year also. And this is the kind of guy, they're not giving up Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? They're not giving up any of the names that are the younger cornerstone pieces. But here's a guy going towards this getting into his mid to late 20s that isn't necessarily going to be a part of the future when they go to strip this thing down. Again, could be a little flyer, give me a late round pick, and bring in a guy that has some consistent NFL experience that can maybe take over, I don't know, some reps from, say, a guy like David Sills, who's clearly been trending in the wrong direction in terms of his productivity. 6'3" to go along with that, give you a little bit more size.
Yeah, Josh Reynolds is a name that I had highlighted as well. It's tough early on the season, Adam, because we don't know who's going to be a seller yet. We do know that people like the Texans and the Lions are trending in that direction of being sellers. Keep in mind that the Detroit Lions will be getting back one of their top draft picks in Jamison Williams out of Alabama. He's
Yep.
coming off of his knee injury, but you expect it's going to look like some kind of Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown combination moving forward. And if Josh Reynolds maybe isn't in the plan, or they could say, hey, we're going to tank, let's see if we could get value, it would be a match made in heaven. So I was targeting Josh Reynolds as well. So you my friend, get the golden prize on that. I want to give one other name that obviously people have brought up in the chat. And obviously it's been on everyone's mind. Terrace Marshall of the Carolina Panthers.
I did highlight him as well. And the funny thing was, you go, has he? Boy, he hasn't really proven anything. And that's still maybe worth the flyer, though.
He hasn't played very much. Matt Rule didn't really like him. I don't know why they drafted him. If they didn't like him, it just made no sense. They kept trotting out Robbie Anderson over him, who didn't even want to be there. It is fascinating to know that he's still so young. Like, he's only in his second year. He's 22 years old. He's a cost-friendly under team control for 2 more years at $1 million a piece. Yeah. He's the type of buy low, low risk, high reward type of guy where you could bring him in and he could start over someone like David Sills almost, once he gets the playbook, right?
Yeah. I don't hate that at all. And if we think about, while we've liked the resurgence here a little bit from Darius Slayton, just if you're thinking big picture, Darius Slayton, final year of his contract, if he's going to go out the door, and then you still have another young option going into next season that could hopefully contribute to this core overall, right? Knowing, as we know, by the way, Kadarius Toney, I expect at some point he's going to get on the field here and play. Just to round out this part of the conversation, you and I had talked about off pod about Kenny Golladay. I don't know if he's healthy, and I don't know even when he's healthy if he actually wants to be here and wants to be playing. Like, I think just based on the talent that the organization is still willing to go the extra mile with Kadarius Toney here and see if they can get him on the field and get some production out of him. I'm very in between whether or not it's just like, hey, I don't want to be here. Kenny Golladay, I don't want to be here. We would have preferred to not have you here. The money is what it is. And there's just a world where even though maybe you could contribute, it honestly just makes more sense if you don't get involved, because we have our group of players. We know what we're trying to build here. You could be helpful. You could be better. You should be better than David Sills. Maybe we're still going to run out David Sills, because Sills has been getting rewarded with reps in spite of the fact that we see what the results are. And that seems to be based on team guy buying in, right, fully invested, where Kenny Golladay is clearly frustrated. And I'm not saying it's not justifiable, but I wonder if he actually gets out there.
Giants are 5-1. Any frustration Kenny Golladay would have, nobody's listening to right now, especially from the Giants' perspective. It's like, you can be upset as much as you want. Do you want to contribute here? If not, we're going to try to find if there's anyone out there that would want to take on that contract.
And by the way, as some people are asking here in the live chat, can we find a trade partner for Kenny Golladay? They mentioned the Rams just because the Rams are willing to spend money. Allen Robinson, who's there and hasn't been very productive, he just had a productive week. He's actually a guy that's been out there for a lot of the snaps, the reps, the targets haven't been there, the production hasn't been there. They already went out and got a guy like that. The Rams may be a spend-happy kind of organization, but nobody is going to spend money unless the Giants are going to eat a significant chunk of it. And I'm not saying that ahead of the deadline, there may actually be a scenario where Joe Schoen says it might be worth it for us to eat a little something if it means we can get it back. Again, think about any of these young wide receivers. Think about the Carolina Panthers and maybe saying, yeah, you can, if you're willing to figure out the problem that will be the Kenny Golladay contract, we'll give you a pick. We'll give you Kenny Golladay in a fifth to bring in Terrace Marshall Jr. for, a year and a half and see if we have something in him. Like, that may be a scenario that could play itself out. I'd say on the less likely end. Let's talk a little bit of defense, Andrew. Why don't we go ahead and get in on that? There's some interesting things, I think. Just listen, again, eye test first and foremost. A lot of production from Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams back out there, Kayvon Thibodeau with the key play. One of the metrics I think that would make you maybe say, oh, did these guys struggle? Was the tackling when we take just a peek at that PFF, where both Dexter Lawrence at 26.3, 29.2 for Kayvon Thibodeau. The thing you don't see inside the stats is that you played against Lamar Jackson, and gosh darn it, that guy can run around. So, the one area where they, quote, struggled is something where everyone's going to struggle, obviously. Overall, the defense was very productive across the board up front. there's a couple of guys that I wanted to highlight specifically. Julian Love and his coverage rate. Again, things that we thought we knew, and you and I had our ideas coming into the season. I did not think that Julian Love was capable of doing what he did on Sunday, being thrust into a lot of coverage situations and coming up big in a lot of spots. He continues to absolutely flip. Really, what he's done is he's getting me back to where I was when they first drafted him. And I said, watch out for Julian Love. And then because of the coaching staffs, they slowly broke down my affection for this young player. Now we're seeing him be really productive on the back end.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's surprised me how well he has played, but obviously he has the respect of everyone in the locker room, knowing that they put a C on his chest for a reason at him. We went from the secondary being super thin. Everyone was really worried about the secondary. Can they perform? We lost James Bradbury. The sky is falling. To now looking at Julian Love and Xavier McKinney with Dane Belton shifting in there and saying that the safety position and that secondary has been holding its own and been very, very wildly better than I think we expected them to be going into the season, knowing that they were a little young, little changeover. The secondary has been really, really good, anchored by Adoree Jackson on one side. But to your point, the Ravens run the football well. They did that against us. This has not just been a Baltimore Ravens problem for us. The Ravens ran for 200 yards plus on the ground. The Giants cannot sustain this type of play and continue to be 5-1 and rattle off wins if we cannot stop the run. And so there's a couple different things. One, Leonard Williams coming back, you hope will help solve that. Didn't against Baltimore because it's a different type of run team. But I think you looked at some different metrics and stats where the real problem lies, and that could be around the inside linebacking core.
Yeah, so if we talk about, and this is why when you say, hey, Kadarius Toney's on this roster, maybe even Kenny Golladay coming back, if we're talking about where's the biggest area of concern, we know the secondary too, and I do have a player that I want to mention in that regard. But, and this is, you can go by the eye test as well. There's guys that I like and have been productive, like Jalen Smith, and also there's a guy we grabbed back off the street after he was released last year and had a short stint with the Giants. Tay Crowder and Jalen Smith, I'm throwing Timon Fox in here just because he got out there on the field. All three of these players, their overall PFF grade, 32, 29, 27 overall. And then more importantly, most specifically, is in the run defense, a 47.4 for Tay Crowder, a 41 for Jalen Smith. The interior behind Leonard Williams, behind Dexter Lawrence, and understanding we think we're going to get Ojulari back, and we're seeing Kayvon Thibodeau start to find his rhythm there. We know O'Shane Ximenez has had a productive year. The Giant, if I'm Joe Shane, I'm looking at, and again, the stats fine. The eye test tells you too. We need someone that can help to clog and stuff that middle more effectively behind our front so that we know when these guys get out to the sidelines and the edges, we can trust our safeties, Xavier McKinney, Dane Belton, Julian Love. We brought in Landon Collins as well to try to go and make those plays for us. And right now, man, unlike these other ones, we don't have, Darian Beaver's not walking through the door, friends. He's done for the year. That's a big difference from some of the wide receiver room or other positions where we say, even secondary, we're going to talk about in a second. You have your boy who should be coming back here shortly, right? There's no one coming in the door right now. That's why the Giants keep throwing different bodies into this group. They need to find someone that sticks there in order to have a successful run. We're talking about the rest of this season.
Yeah, Adam, you talked about Jalen Smith coming off the street. He's starting. Like, he came off the street. He didn't just get onto the roster. They put him immediately onto the field, and they're like, go out there and help us, bud.
And he hasn't been bad, but he's a contributing backup linebacker. You don't want him as the starter.
He's a good rotational piece, as we like to say. He's in there. He can give you a couple of good snaps, but the longer he's out there, the longer some of his weaknesses will end up showing.
And just by the way, difficulty tackling and very bad in coverage as well in this particular game for Jalen Smith.
Yeah, it wasn't great for him overall, Adam. You mentioned it before. The problem that we have is behind him is Micah McFadden and Austin Calitro, who, after Calitro was a contributor in week 1, hasn't really been able to get on the field. Feels like he's another rotational guy where if you needed him in a pinch, someone got hurt, he could play a handful of snaps. Wouldn't want to see him out there full time. With Micah McFadden being young, to your point, there is not a guy on the roster that's on IR or that's been injured that's coming back to help supplement this inside linebacking core.
Yeah.
We have that in the wide receiver room because we haven't seen Kadarius Toney. We haven't seen Kenny Golladay in a while. on the inside linebacking core, Darian Beavers is out for the year. He was someone that they expected to come in and contribute. His injury really changed those plans. The Giants need to be looking at veterans that are on a cost-effective deal that can come in and be one of those rotational pieces. Doesn't have to be a stalwart in the middle that's going to cost $10 million a year, but has to be able to, take away a few snaps from Jalen Smith, and so everyone stays fresh and the rotation looks good.
Yep, 100%, man. And next episode, we'll come back in. We'll highlight some of those players on the interior that maybe the Giants can try to target out there across the league, watching for teams that are struggling. I'll tell you right now, it's the same way that I went and looked at Josh Reynolds. I went over and looked at the Lions and their linebacking core. We all know Rodriguez is there in that linebacking core for them. Saw him on Hard Knocks. That's not the kind of guy you're going out and grabbing from somewhere, right? You need to find someone that's on the right team and also is not a part necessarily of them building towards the future. One last note I'll make here. Let me ask you this question when it comes to the secondary, and we can dive in deeper as we move through the week. But do you feel like, we know Rodarius Williams closer to getting back out there on the field, Aaron Robinson continue to struggle with injuries and everything that's happened with him, Adoree Jackson nursing that knee. I had a specific player looking at the Houston Texans that I thought maybe the Giants could try to target here. But how do you feel about the secondary? Are you thinking that if you get the veteran linebacker with everything else, obviously the back end of the defense serves to benefit? Or do you think trying to get a value buy to add to this unit is something the Giants need to do?
Well, we also can mention Cordell Flott, who's been injured as well. It feels like between Rodarius Williams, Aaron Robinson, and Cordell Flott coming back, one of those guys needs to be a key contributor. We saw, based on some different packages, Darnay Holmes wasn't on the field as much in the game against the Ravens. They wanted to go a little bit bigger. So Darnay Holmes didn't see as much action. But between all these guys, it feels like there's just other areas where if Joe Schoen has a pecking order of the three areas that he needs to go, inside linebacker feels like first and foremost a place that we have to go. After that, you can make arguments on where you would need to be. If you're telling me we can get a cost-effective cornerback on a that's on a 1-year deal, that's a veteran that can help stabilize one of the sides with all these injuries, then I'm definitely here for it. Hit me with the name that you identified as someone maybe that the Giants should look at.
Yeah, there'll be a couple more potentially to look at here too. But Desmond King, the second, Houston Texans. He's been around the league. He's 28 years old. Final year of his contract is 2023, making 2.5 and then 4.4. Wouldn't even be the worst thing in the world to have a guy like this next season on your roster at a pretty cost-effective number. So far this season, you go and take a look at what he's put up. 18 targets, 11 receptions allowed, has an interception this year, has a very favorable PFF grade, but even I'm not even going to give it to you because that's not what's most important. Had 3 interceptions a year ago as well in 2021, gave up 63 receptions on 91 targets. So, this is just a guy that has some veteran experience, obviously. He's 5'10", a buck, 5'10", 200, a little bit of size, a little bit of length. Do I think he'll get exposed in a couple of matchups? Sure, but the price point is right. The Houston Texans, who the Giants are going to play after the trade deadline. But potentially there's just this opportunity, man. Go grab a guy with some experience. And I think, again, we talked about this. And watch this. I'll steal this from you. At the end of the day, coming into this season, I always talk about when it's a rebuilding year, you want the young talent to play. You want them to get their reps. You want them to get exposed. You want them to learn. And I still want to see Cordell Flott out there. But now at 5-1, fighting in the division, looking to lock up a playoff spot, this is where veteran talent and proving commodities, this is where I think you do start to change your mindset a little bit. And you can go as far as to say a guy like Landon Collins, a veteran, you know what he is, you know what he isn't, but you feel like you bring him in and he's going to fill role X for you if he can get out there on the field for the Giants. Likewise for any of these potential trade targets, even a Terrence Marshall Jr., exciting potentially, but you don't know what he is, right? And I think the Giants want to bring in known commodities whenever they can, because that's going to shore up what they're doing on both sides of the football here. It's going to be interesting to see. The rest of the week, we'll talk about how much money do the Giants have to work with, what can they potentially accomplish with some players currently on the roster, and how can Joe Schoen try to find opportunities maybe beyond what we've seen to this point. Guys off the street, veteran minimum deals. Do the Giants have the capabilities and willingness to go a little bit deeper?
We just need players to be healthy to allow Wink Martindale to scheme for every single game. As you've seen, Adam, we know he brings blitzes, and that's all that people think that he does. But they change their personnel packages based on if they need to focus on a heavier run game. They need more cornerbacks in the passing game. They need more defensive backs deep in cover 3 or cover 2. It's more intricate than people give him credit for, but I think that's the way that Wink Martindale likes it. Just think that all I do is bring pressure, and maybe we confuse you, or maybe you don't prepare as well for us for the next game.
100%, my friends. Of course, we thank you, man. The YouTube, this live is just bubbling right now. I'm almost embarrassed to close the doors on this particular session, but we really appreciate everyone that comes in on these lives as we do them during the week. Be sure to get over to the YouTube channel and subscribe to it if you're not already doing so. Totally free, really helps us out. Go get that podcast feed wherever you get those needs fulfilled as well. Totally free, but also really helps out the podcast. So we appreciate, man, all the support, all the conversation. Davey Anonymous, shout out to you, sir. I saw you making some comments in there. Some things I understood, some other things I didn't have any clue what you were talking about. I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean come back into the next episode and clarify what 5 and 17 and Joe Montana and what type of reference points we're talking about here. These are things that I get curious about while I'm doing the show, and I want clarity. Until next time, though, my friends, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.